Hour.
On the podcast, April hardcovers are all the rage in the solar system of your imagination. Plus, we continue the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Uncompromising Honor, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We talked to David Weber this time on the reissue of his great science fiction novel, The Apocalypse Troll. That book is now out in a spiffy new trade paperback edition. It's a great read, a very cool science fiction concept, and it's a Weber where a great deal of time is spent in modern times, our times, and in the modern military milieu, which is also cool. And of course, there's more David Weber as we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Now here's the news. We have an April ebook sale, and it's a doozy of bargainiferous proportions. King Jerry's Spaceship, April Jerry Pournelle ebook sale. To celebrate the new Starborn and Godsons mass market edition, we are dropping prices on all Jerry Pournelle ebooks. $2 off the ebook for Starborn and Godsons by Jerry Pournelle, Larry Niven, and Stephen Barnes, and $1 off ebooks such as The Legacy of Heorot by Jerry Pournelle, Larry Niven, and Steve Barnes, and Beowulf's Children. Those are the two sequels to Starborn and Godsons. Best of Jerry Pournelle, edited by John F. Carr, is also $1 off. Mamelukes, Janissaries, Lord of Janissaries, Footfall, and oh so many more. Anything the late, great Jerry Pournelle had a hand in, we are discounting at the Baen website and across all of our ebook retailers. So check it out. Sale ends April 30th. Hey, the Baen April original hardcovers and trade paperbacks are out. Out now is Rich Man's Sky by Will McCarthy. An international team of elite military women masquerading as space colonists are set to infiltrate and neutralize the largest and most dangerous project in human history. But nothing is that simple when rich men control the sky, as everyone involved is about to discover. And out in April is 1636 Caliban's War by Charles E. Gannon and Robert E. Waters. Domingos Fernandes Calabar started out as a military advisor to the Portuguese in Brazil, but these days the Portuguese have a new label for Calabar, traitorous dog. Now Calabar helps the Dutch fleet strike at Portuguese and Spanish interest on land and sea. 1636 Calabar's War by Charles E. Gannon and Robert E. Waters, and Rich Man's Sky by Will McCarthy are now available at booksellers everywhere. Check them out. And welcome David Weber back to the podcast. Hey, David.
Hi.
David Weber. Hang on, I'm going to click up my little bio here. I have, although I think I could do it verbatim by now. You would think, right?
I am hurt.
David Weber. Let's see. Let me just guess. 8 million books in print at this point. Yes, that's what it says. 8 million copies of his book, 30 titles on the New York Times bestseller list over time, and a science fiction powerhouse, says our biography, which I helped write, but I think Corinda put that in. Most of all, he's the creator of the vastly popular Honor Harrington series, of which many of those have made the New York Times bestseller list. The creator of it's the Basel series called
The Norfresa books.
The Norfresa books.
Yeah,
and
the War God series, whatever, I don't think I ever actually gave it an official handle.
The War God Zone. Man, I want more of those.
Hey. Tony's already told me my next solo project, the other Tony, okay, has already told me that my next solo project for Baen needs to be the sequel to Sword of the South, which I definitely want to write once we get things like COVID and the Safehold book that is for Tor that is 2 years overdue, and a few minor problems like that dealt with. That will be my next solo Bane project.
Very good. And what will be coming out is, by the way, all right. So David got started back in the early '90s, and Jim Bain bought a bunch of books all at once, right? And one of those, not this one we're going to talk about, but another one was the one that that Governor is sequel to, correct?
Prequel to, yeah. Path of the
So
Fury, yeah.
Path of the Fury, yeah.
Yeah, and it became In Fury Born because the real reason for that is that a lot of people had been asking me where they could get Path of the Fury in hardcover, and I'm like, it was issued as a mass market, and I don't think, except for Jim and the library bindings on the first few Honor Harringtons when he went back to do the hardcovers. Normally that doesn't happen, especially for standalone books. I mean, I know that Bain is releasing the leatherbound of the Honor Harringtons now in limited edition. But as a general rule, if it's a standalone book and it's in paper, they're not going to go back and reissue it in hardcover. So what I did is I did the prequel to Path of the Fury, Alicia DeVries' life from the time she was about 13 up through the end, up through the point at which she meets Tisiphone at the beginning of Path of the Fury. And we bound them together into a single hardcover as In Fury Born. So over half of that book is brand new material, but it also contains the original Path of the Fury. And I really, really was hesitant about doing that because I wrote the entire original Path of the Fury in under 2 months. I mean, it just came together. And I was really afraid that I wouldn't be able to match that same flow coming at another book in the series. But I think it worked. So the book that you just mentioned, Governor, with Richard Fox, is set 300-400 years before Path of the Fury. And what it deals with actually is, what the books we are doing will deal with is the creation of the empire that Elysius serves. And in the very first book, in Governor, you begin to see the connection between New Dublin, the planet that Elysia's mother's family is from, and the Murphy dynasty. And you understand why tradition, the loyalty to the crown is such bred into their bones tradition back there. I enjoyed it. I think it's good. I believe that you have inveigled a short story out of us that Richard is going to take the first pass on.
Yeah, that will be come out May 15th. That's short story, and then the book Governor, it's the next major Weber original project, which is June book.
Collaboration.
The collaboration, yes, but it hasn't been published before. It's
no.
Oh.
And I think Eric and I are supposed to have In Fireborn due out in October. Yes. And we're experiencing a few glitches in the production process right now, but I'm working on them. Okay, so and I know Bain can put books through production faster than anybody else. So if I get it to you like 2 weeks before release date, everything will be fine. It's like,
don't do that.
I don't think so. No,
don't do that.
Yeah,
I remember one time that you did quite a major rewrite of about 1,000 words on Sword of the South. And we had to get that. That was a pretty fast turnaround.
Yeah.
But,
well, and
I mean, we want the books to be as great as possible, of course. So we did it.
Well,
and you did.
Tony has the other Tony Tony without a Y,
Mm-hmm. My
has
boss. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, has made it a rule that she's not going to schedule one of my books till she has the manuscript. Partly because she doesn't want to break me, if I'm running late trying to ram it through, but also because there have been some issues that have to do with concussions and COVID and little
You
things
keep
like that.
falling downstairs and having trees fall on you. And
I never fell downstairs.
oh, okay.
Okay.
Didn't you trip on some
Um,
new flooring though? What was that? Was
no,
like
no, no,
you
no, 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 no,
seriously
no,
hurt yourself. But
no. It was a shooting range in Georgia,
uh,
and I had just come in from broad daylight, and the I was still wearing my sunglasses, and nobody had warned me that there was a step down into the next room, and it was a full step down. It was like 7-8 inches of step, and so I've got a gun bag in each hand. I've got my sunglasses on. It's dark. I step in, and there's no floor where my foot expected to find it. And with my hands occupied, there was no way I could even try to catch myself. So I hit the floor flat on my face and kept sliding across it till I hit a solid obstacle with the top of my head that stopped me. And that was the day before Dragon Con. So I have no memory at all of that Dragon Con. People tell me I did fine. Okay, but I'm like,
wow.
okay, good. I'm glad to hear it. Um, but yeah, that was, yeah. And I had just really and truly started getting back into the groove. Okay. Cause it took me, God, 2 years to really get my focus back on that. And I was cooking with gas.
Mm.
Jacob and I did the
You had some
Valkyrie
heart issues. You
Protocol.
had some health issues, is what you're
Yeah.
saying. Yeah.
And Richard,
Before that.
Richard and I got governor done, and then COVID came along.
Mm.
So I'm like, okay, fine, I can take a hint.
Take it
um,
easy. Do it as you can. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, doing it as doing a little bit for David Weber is like a major career for most people.
yeah.
So,
Um, the Once upon a time, um, in the long ago days of my youth, I did 750,000 words a year, which is actually kind of on a par for some of the old pulp writers, who had to do it all with a typewriter, but who didn't bother with second drafts, things like that. Um, and I I can't do that anymore.
that's quite a
I don't.
lot. I mean, most people, a Weber can be 200,000 words long, but most books are 100,000 words long.
I
So we're talking
know. I know. Sharon.
7.5, you know.
Sharon keeps telling me saw them in half, and I'm like,
Yeah.
but that's not where the storyline ends. And she's like,
But which way would you saw them? This way or
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Well, you could kind of, I guess, you could do like, okay, um, David's written another huge book. Here's the first half of it in June, and we'll let you have the second half of it in August, I guess. But I've never been comfortable. To me, the story has to go to the point at which the story ends. Okay. And if it's a series, then it has to go to the point at which that installment of the story ends. You
Mm-hmm.
can't just arbitrarily say, oops, the words are too many words, got to
Yeah.
stop.
And it's not nice to do to readers.
Well, it's kind of like, okay, our niece by marriage, Jessica, was not, she's not, reading is not really her, primary form of entertainment. So many, many years ago, we took her to see the Fellowship of the Ring, and we came out of the theater and we're like, "Well, what did you think of it?" And she said, "Well, it didn't really have much of an ending, did it?" We're like, It's a trilogy, honey.
Are
You
you
know?
aware?
She was like,
Yeah.
oh, well, that makes a lot more sense. Um, but yeah, I just, to me, like I say, I can't. Commercially, it might be better if I could just say, okay, I'm done now, kind of thing. But I can't stop until the story's done, not
Yes.
when I'm done. Um,
Well, it seems to have worked. And the thing about it, Tony and I have said this to each other before. It's like writers can do what writers can do. And you try to get them to do what they do best at their best. And that's what you do as an editor. You
yeah.
don't try to yank them around into something else. So
Well, I've often said that one of the things that makes a really good editor, and Bain's been good about this, is that if they see a problem with a story, they explain the problem that they see to the author and then let the author go fix it rather than saying, okay, I think to make this work, what you're going to have to do is,
yeah,
okay.
no, that never works because the writer will not be able to do it.
Yeah.
That's because it's not their thing. It's
Well,
not their vision.
it's kind of like cover art. Um, I have a little bit different attitude towards cover art from a lot of authors because I did so much PR work and I worked with so many artists. And I understand that the more minute the direction you give the artist, the more constrained the artist feels, and therefore you are not going to get that artist's best work. Okay, now I love David Mattingly. I mean, he's like, okay, which uniform is she in for this cover? What rank is she? How many insignia? How many stars? Et cetera, et cetera.
David Mattingly is the main cover artist for the Honor Harrington series at this point.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But I don't try to tell him, yes, and by the way, she is, whatever. I mean, and the other side of it is that cover art, it's really, really good when the cover art reflects a scene in the book. Okay. And David's, pretty good about that too. But it's it's the primary function of cover art is to draw you to the book. Okay. And the stronger the art, the more likely you are to be drawn to it. So it's part of the whole, for want of a better term, the marketing format is how the cover art represents for want of a better term, the feel of the book
Yeah, the
rather
spirit.
than the exact, imagery of the book. Um, for example, I'm looking at the Apocalypse Trail cover behind you, and I do not remember Ludmilla being dressed like that when she went after the troll. I'm sorry, I understand. Yeah,
Well,
I,
but
I
I mean, that's the way that Aston probably imagines her.
mhm.
That's
Yeah, well, that may be,
he spent a lot of time trying to get her out of his mind at the
yeah,
beginning of the book.
well,
So
he's like she's 19 and I'm 58,
that's right.
kind of
Well, that's what
thing.
he thought.
Yeah, well,
And
that's what she thought. Yeah.
and she's incredibly muscle because she grew up on a heavy gravity world. So
Well, and her little fellow traveler uh, pushes some of that too, as well as the heavy grav
no, that's right.
environment.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. All right. Out
Okay.
now is the Apocalypse Troll.
Out
Uh,
again
Out
is the
again.
apocalypse
That's right.
row. Yes.
This is a reissue. It originally came out in mass market original, I believe. No, it's not. It was
It was
hardcover.
originally released in hardcover. Wait a
Yeah,
minute.
yeah. Okay.
It was originally released in this one.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
with the interesting green screen effect.
yeah.
Ooh,
If it's got
I've
green
got it
in it,
upside
it's a
down. Yeah.
see-through book.
Yeah.
So
Okay, there it is. Um,
I probably have one of these. So there's an
yeah.
interesting sort of history behind how this book, because you wrote this book before the fall of the Soviet Union,
Yeah.
the
I
first
wrote I,
revision of it, right?
this is actually was written before Mutiny's Moon, and was the third solo book that Jim bought from me after Mutineer's Moon and the Armageddon Inheritance, the original triad Dahak and, well, duo, I guess, was Dahak and Ludmilla. Um, and it kept getting sort of nudged aside by other projects. I think it was not released until what?
I think it's 99.
Yeah, so it was like 10 years
Yeah.
from the time that he bought it, because I think he bought it. He bought it in either late in '89 or early in '90. And it was great for me because he was getting first author deals on the prices that what he was paying for the books, but it was at the same time it was providing me with a cash flow that allowed me to start doing this full time out of the gate. I mean, from the time that Insurrection came out, I have supported myself full time as a writer, which is not common. Um, and I like to think that part of it is the quality of the work, but I also have to acknowledge that Jim Bain probably knew more about how to bring along a new author than almost anybody else out there in terms of marketing decisions and placement. Um, I was totally just devastated to fall into his hands and see my career tank, that kind of thing. Jim was great. I didn't always agree with him, but I would say that at least half of the times I disagreed with him, I eventually found out he was right. Um, like, okay, can I tell my favorite Jim Bain story?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, he originally didn't buy Mutineer's Moon or the Armageddon Inheritance. And he sent me this long list of things that were wrong with them and that I needed to do. And I was like, I don't know, Jim. And he says, well, I tell you what, we can publish these two under a pen name, and then you write one the way I'm telling you to write it, and we'll see which ones do better. I said, well, let me think about it. So I went away and I looked at his letter. Well, all right, 10% of what he's saying, he's right on about. Okay, yeah, all right, I can see. Yeah, okay, another 15% I could probably stand to change if that meant he'd write the check. Okay, but the other 75% of what he wants, he's just like, he's totally out to lunch on that. But how do I tell somebody who's been in the publishing business as long as he has that I, the guy who, Insurrection hadn't even come out yet, is a better judge, than he is. So I said, okay, fine. So I went down. I did the 10% that I thought he was right about. I fixed that part. I held the 15% that felt that I could stand. That was going to be my reserve for making concessions to him, kind of thing. And then I went through and did a global re-edit, changing do not to don't and was not to wasn't and whatnot, all the way through the book, wherever it appeared in dialogue. And I've always had a fairly conversational narrative style. I've always used contractions there, but I went at it with a vengeance this time. And then I sent the manuscripts back to Jim and I said, Jim, I've thought about what you said and I've given effect to some of your requirements. And in the process, I've shortened the books by about 7,000 words each. What do you think? He's like, oh, this is exactly what I wanted, kind of thing. And he bought it. And I always meant to tell him about that. What all I really did was change the word count, Jim. But then we lost him. So I'm sure, somewhere he knows now. And he's proud, I got a gotcha in there, but I loved Jim.
Well, he's probably used to wanting writers to do like the impossible and then getting 10% of it. It's like, gravy.
Yeah.
So
Well, I know that
maybe he fooled you. I don't know.
Oh God. When he started reading On Basilisk Station, I'm sitting there in my office, I'm working, the phone rings.
That's the first Honor Harrington book.
It's the first Honor Harrington book.
Yes.
And he's like, you can't call him that. And I said, can't call him what? And he says, well, everybody knows a haven is a safe place to be, and a republic is the good guy. Manticores are man-eating beasts, and kingdoms and empires are the bad guys. You're going to have to change it. I said, no, that's kind of the whole point, and so we discussed that for 50 minutes, long distance from New York, pre-cell phone days. I finally said, Jim, look, the bad guys do not wake up one morning and say, I know we'll call ourselves the omnivoracity of evil. Okay, that's part of what's going on. He said, well, okay, it doesn't bother me as much as it did. I think still think you're wrong, but okay. And he hung up. I'm like, okay, fine. 5 minutes later, the phone rings and it's Jim. He says, you made her ugly. I said, what are you talking about? He said, you made Honor Harrington ugly. I said, no, I didn't. He said, yes, you did. It says right here. I said, Jim, that's the way she sees herself. Keep going. And so there's silence except for the riffling of pages. And he says, but that's like 5 pages of the manuscript later. Okay, this is what's going to be fixed in the reader's mind, kind of thing. And I said, Jim, uh, you know, uh, and he said, you don't understand. He said, Bane heroines have to be such that men lust after them and women lust to be them. And I said, that's the most sexist thing I ever heard. He said, sex this schmexist that sells books, and I was like, okay, fine. So I moved to the scene where Alistair McKeon sees her for the first time and reflects that the imagery in her file does not do justice, et cetera. So I moved it forward like 2 pages in the final novel. And I hung up the phone and I said, okay, we have now spent 90 minutes. And he's like 8 pages. Yeah, this is going to take a while. Not another peep out of him for the rest of the book. But it was shortly after that he handed me to Tony as a full time. He said, I'm going to make you one of Tony's pets. And I said, really? He said, yeah. And I said, okay, but why? And he said, because when Bob Heinlein sends me a manuscript and I say there's a problem here, he says, okay, how do we fix it? When I tell you there's a problem, you say, oh, Jim, And what Tony figured out is the way that my brain works is I have to find all of the potential uh-ohs of making a change, what it's going to interject into the story that's going to have to be changed, or where it's going to be, go against the grain of what I'm doing here, before I can consider the positives of including it. That doesn't mean I'm rejecting it out of hand. It means I'm going, well, it's going to be a problem if I go here. It's going to be a problem there. It's going to be a problem over there. And I'm thinking aloud. So that's why Tony never didn't do story conferences on the phone with me. She would send them to me in written form so I could do all of that before I wrote my answer, which is wandering afield. Yeah.
That's it's a bit, at this point, David, it's a bit of a beyond even stereotype that David will take every possible avenue and like a particle that's arriving at its eventual position, and he'll present most of them in prose.
Yeah. Well, Tony told me
some length until you get to the spaceship battle.
Yes, and Tony will say, "There's no exploding starships in this book. How well do you know it's yours?" But I remember Tony said to me one time, she said, one thing that I've discovered is that it seems like 90% of the times I make a suggestion and you say, yeah, I tried it that way and it didn't work. And then you explain why it didn't work. And I realize you're right, but I'm like, oh, only 90%? She said, don't push it.
Well, I don't know, but in my opinion, Basilisk Station is almost a perfect example of its kind and kind of a little classic. So whatever it was, whether Honor's ugly or not in it, it's a damn good book. So I just remember her almond-eyes, and there was something about coffee. That's my main thought about Honor.
She didn't like coffee.
Yeah.
And people are like, and I'm like, anybody who reads that book should recognize the work of a recovering addict, where her dislike for coffee is concerned. And a recovering addict who, unfortunately or fortunately, depending how you look at it, has fallen off the wagon,
lapsed back into the demon.
Yeah.
The team of Blake. So, all right. Well, this book is the Apocalypse Troll.
Mhm.
Is even though you did do some revision on it in the '90s
Yeah.
as things went along, and it's remarkably fresh. I just read it. I had never read it. I just read it yesterday, and it could be a modern Weber right now. It's quite good. Even there's a few things that that there's tapping on keys and things like, but it's just and it's really interesting in that it is set in 2007. And so in a way it is an alternate timeline. It could maybe go in with and it could go into the that other series you did
The
now,
Gordian series with
Gordian
Jacob.
series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've
So
thought about it. Because we could have yet another split universe where this would be a fairly significant change, kind of thing. Um,
but
but
and you talk about I mean, we won't necessarily, I don't know if it's not really a big giveaway since we say it on the back cover, but it most of the book that starts in space in the far future, and most of it takes place on Earth in our basic time,
mhm,
and among our military,
yeah,
specifically the Navy a lot,
yeah.
and other places.
Well, the Marines,
Yes, the
yeah,
Marines.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It was. I really enjoyed writing the book because it let me do some fun. Sharon was really pissed off with me when Biltmore House got firebombed outside Asheville. And she was much less upset over the fact that St. Joseph's Hospital was burning to the ground. And I was like, honey, that just doesn't speak well of you. you know. But I actually had somebody the other day who complained to me. They obviously hadn't read the copyright date, but they had complained to me about it as, you're just trying to capitalize on the polarization of society today and so forth when the cyborg from the future begins inflaming
No,
racial.
it's prescient. It's really, I
Yeah,
was like,
but
wow, David,
but
you
but
got
how,
some things right here.
but I was like, no, actually, I wrote this book like 30 years ago, kind of thing. Um, I think maybe part of it is my love for history, because I think that when historians project, they tend to do it more accurately than just blue sky. I'm going to write a novel. I don't really know history. I'm going to write a novel where this and this and this are true in the future, even though they're not true today. If you have a grasp of the flow of history and the way that people historically have responded to given situations, then I think it gives you more of a platform for deciding how your characters are going to respond and how your society is going to grow and move. Now, it can also be blinders. Okay, it can also be, well, they never did it that way before, so they'll never do it that way now, kind of thing. Um, and I think that it can be okay, I think that near future science fiction, something like The Troll, is a wonderful medium for social criticism. Okay. I really did not set out to do any social criticism in The Troll. I set out to write a book that would be an adventure novel, and it would be like, how does an alien who can telepathically influence people destabilize a society? It finds the existing fault lines and drives wedges into them to make it worse. Okay. But I really don't think that anything other than fairly near future science fiction is a very good avenue for social criticism in one regard. And that is the tendency that people have to project current day problems 200, 300, 1,000 years into the future. Marion Zimmer Bradley, I know there's some other problems with her these days, but she was really bad about giving characters in her Darkover novels who were Terrans. They were dealing with exactly the same glass ceiling that women were dealing with in the 1960s and the 1970s. To me, that speaks very poorly both for the society and for women. Okay. And so when I wanted to make a comment on the stupidity of excluding women from roles because they're women, my approach to it is to simply, it's a done deal that they're not excluded. That's so much a done deal that nobody thinks about it one way or the other. It's a total non-issue. The example that I like to use is that it has the question of sexual equality and gender freedom has all of the burning significance for Honor Harrington's time that Pharaoh's policy towards the Hittites has for us. Okay, it was settled 2,000, 1,500 years before she was born. Now, I also created Grayson under a very special set of circumstances to give sort of the foil for that situation. But Honor Harrington and the way that I write female protagonists, or even female characters in general, in my science fiction, they're all part of that you show people that this is the future by making it so totally the future in your books. You know, basically what you're saying is wake up and get with the program. Okay. And I've told people, I've said, societies that don't extend full participation to their women, to anybody, they're denying themselves 50% of their potential capital, human capital, in intelligence and in everything else. And down the road, that will cost them in terms of where they are compared to societies that said, we're more interested in what's in your head than how your chromosomes are arranged. Okay. And that's a little bit of Ludmilla in The Troll, too.
So yeah, that is the because she essentially saves the human race.
That's what she does,
or doesn't, maybe.
Yeah.
We'll see. But
well, she's serving in a military where the commander of the task force that she's with at the opening of the book is a woman. The crew, the 3-person crew of her fighter, there's one guy with what is probably my favorite name I've ever hung on a character to date, Anwar O'Donnell. It's just, such a wonderful glitching of cultures. But she's also a full colonel who, like Honor, looks a lot younger than her age. In her case, it is because of an alien symbiote that kills like 99+% of the people that it infects. But the 0.1% that it doesn't kill acquire all sorts of interesting physical side effects, including apparently immortality. And they pass it to their children. So she's what they call a Thusela, short for Methuselah. And so that, she is a highly, highly experienced fighter pilot at the beginning of the book. So it's not like I just picked somebody at random and dumped them on the planet I did my, I explained why she could do what she could do. Well, partly because it's like, okay, I'm a David Weber heroine. I can do anything. But
well, it turns out she's not 18.
No.
And
which is a shock for Richard Aston when he pulls her out of the water and has to get her out of her spacesuit.
Yeah. And he's like 49.
No, he's like 50 plus. He's about to retire from the Navy. Yeah.
And so he's
And
he's he's feeling icky because he's so attracted to,
I'm
but
not supposed to feel that way about a 19-year-old.
yes,
Bad, Richard. You know.
turns out she's older than he is.
Yeah, she's close to twice his age. She's
Yeah,
85 or something, you know. She's older than that once you allow for the relativity effects of all the time she spent traveling at near light speed. Um,
if they ever do get together, she's the one robbing the cradle.
oh,
It's-
absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And she really has a thing for t-shirts, for the printed t-shirts. Um, and I I like her a lot. I think it shows in the way that I uh, wrote the book. I like Aston too, but he's really they're a partnership all the way through.
So before can we talk about the setup and
Yeah.
just give a little short précis of what the story is? We
Hmm.
start with a battle, and the human forces are closing in on the Kangas on their final three worlds after 400 years of intermittent battling or
Well,
constant.
it hasn't been all that intermittent. Okay, let me. One of the things you have to understand about the Kangas is they had a really unhappy planetary childhood. And they have come to the conclusion they shared their planet with another sentient tool using species, and eventually, and they hated each other. And eventually, the Kangas won and wiped out the other species. And they had come to the belief that God was a Kanga, and that therefore and that these creatures who hadn't looked like Kangas were servants of the devil. So then they finally start exploring other worlds, and they find other sentient species which are not Kangas, and their response is to wipe them out. And so they have been genociding races for a couple of centuries, maybe three, before they discover Earth. Um, and they do their damnedest to genocide Earth, but we are the most advanced species they found so far. All the others have been either pre-technic or very early technology, and they have decided that this is a dispensation of God, that they can find these guys and get them early. So then they run into us, and we're not as advanced as they are, but we're advanced enough that their initial probe gets the crap shot out of it. And we capture some of their technology, and that's really when the war begins. So humanity has tried to talk to the Kangas. Humanity has tried to find some way to not kill everybody in sight. And what really, really kind of convinced humanity that it wasn't going to work was that one of Earth's first extrasolar colonies, we began expanding after we began encountering the Kangas. And the faster than light technology at that point was crude enough that it took 30, 40 years between attacks. But they bioengineered a weapon, the symbiote that Ludmilla has, and released it on the planet. And they expected it to kill 100% of the humans on the planet. And it almost did. And that was the point at which humanity said, okay, there's no point trying to talk to these people, not if they're willing to employ that kind of a weapon. So from that point on, it was a genocidal struggle from both sides. Um, and the task force that Ludmilla is with is headed back for overhaul. And it's only a part of the squadron that originally it was assigned to. Um, and everything is cool. I mean, the Kangas have been driven back. They've been driven back. They're basically the last three systems. They're under siege. It's either they're going to get wiped out or they're finally going to have to talk to us, etc. When they encounter a Kanga task force way the hell off the beaten path and much farther up into the multi-dimensional space than the Kanga, who are very cautious, ever go, and they they go in pursuit when they realize that the course these folks are on is headed for Earth. But in the course of the pursuit, they realize also that the Kangas are going for what they call a Takashita transition, which no one's ever done to the best of anyone's knowledge, which is sort of an esoteric manipulation of their multi-dimensional drive technology, which will actually allow you to travel in time. And they realize that what the Kangas are doing is they're trying to get to Earth before Earth develops its technology and wipe out humanity before humanity ever becomes a threat. So they go in pursuit. And there is a space battle. It's what would you say the first 10% of the book?
Yeah.
Is it
Yeah.
that much?
Yeah.
And ultimately, there are two survivors from both fleets. There's Ludmilla, who crash lands in the middle of the Atlantic. And fortunately for her, I was writing the book, so she landed right next to a sailboat with a guy who was single-handing
Yeah.
across the Atlantic.
That's true. But I mean, her guidance system had,
Yeah, that's true. The guidance
it
system
is
of her,
explained, and it's not just
yeah,
out of nowhere that she
no,
landed.
no, the guidance system, the escape pod in her fighter is programmed to head for help,
Yeah.
and it sees the boat, so it homes in on it.
Yeah.
But then on the other side is the troll, the apocalypse troll. And the troll is
It is not a
cyborg.
Kanga.
No, it is
It is
not a
something
Kanga.
else.
It is something else entirely. Basically, the Kangas have discovered that humans are better at physics and the hard sciences, and the Kangas are better at the biological sciences. But they've also discovered that humans are more flexible in combat, we're more willing to take risks, and so we're basically better at fighting than they are, which was really hard for them to internalize after successfully wiping out numerous species. So they decided it had to be something
They wiped
inherent.
out more species than you have bestsellers.
I don't think so. No, no, no.
No,
But
you're still up on the Kanga.
I think I'm still up on the Kangas and
Right.
the
All
Harenga.
right. Anyway,
But
sorry.
so what they do is they think that it must be something inherent in the way human brains work. So they clone human brains and install them in cyborg fighting machines. And they have their own name for them, but the humans who encounter them call them trolls. Um, and unlike Ludmilla, who winds up basically with nothing but the clothes on her back, which admittedly are sort of a really super advanced back suit and her sidearm, the troll has an entire like 10,000 ton fighter, complete with combat mechs and whatnot. Um, Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately for him, he's also discovered that we have nuclear weapons. And so, even with a 10,000 ton fighter, he's not real happy about the thought of going out where nuclear weapons can get at him because eventually we might get lucky. Okay. Um, and in fact, a U.S. Navy task group shoots down like 4 or 5 troll fighters just like his uh, when they uh, when they come down over the Atlantic um, with the trying to get the Kangas into position to release their bioweapon. Um, so the,
And
the
this,
that's
the
yeah,
troll is, I mean, you said it, but the troll is a human, is human brain tissue
yeah,
that's been warped and made into this horribly resentful,
yeah. The only people that
angry
the only
thing.
people trolls hate more than Kangas, who control them and are responsible for their kind of twisted existence, is the normal humans who they're because that's where they came from. Okay, and that's who has been killing them for 150 200 years now in combat, is they're being forced by their alien creators to go up against the species from whence they were in a sense stolen, and they hate both of them with they hate both of them with the kind of passion that is only possible for someone who can never hope to rebel against the controls programmed into them on literally a genetic level by their Kanga creators. However, our troll discovers that yeah, how many of you have seen well, okay, the last Terminator movie with the Terminator who no longer has a function, okay, because Skynet's been destroyed, John's dead, etc. That's kind of where the troll is. He realizes, wait, there are no Kangas to give me any orders anymore. That means I can decide what I'm going to do. And what he decides he's going to do will not work out well for the rest of humanity if he gets away with it. And that's probably as much pump priming as we need to do for people who like to find out what happened in books.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
But
a little bit
that's
more about
seriously,
Ludmilla's
yeah,
symbiote. The interesting thing is that while the trolls are sort of human, at least Kanga technology mixes,
yeah.
um, Ludmilla, our heroine, is in fact sort of a human Kanga technology mix because she's uh,
Her
the
her
descendant of
her
this.
her ancestor survived the symbiote
Yeah.
and passed it on to her. And the Thusulas are kind of resented by the normal humans around them because they are effectively immortal. So far as Ludmilla is concerned, knows no Thusula has ever died of old age. The symbiote doesn't approve of them dying of old age, and so it keeps fixing them when they, the symbiote's not aware, but it's like, okay, the host is slowing down, I got to fix that, kind of thing. David will be producing 750,000 a year for the next 2 centuries because he has a symbiote. um, but it also it helps heal wounds. It speeds recovery times. Ludmilla survives what should have been a mortal wound when she's shot down because of her symbiote. Now, the bad news is that the symbiote does this by using up its own resources, and when it reaches the tipping point, it begins scavenging the host. And it will go right on scavenging the host till they both die if they're in a situation. So Milla probably wouldn't have made it without Aston pulling her out of the water and feeding her chicken soup.
A whole
Uh,
lot of
a
chicken.
whole lot of chicken soup because the symbiote is like really, really hungry. Um, but yeah, and the other thing that it does is it enhances neural impulses. Uh, Thusula's neural impulses move faster than normal human. So Milla grew up on a heavy grav planet, and she has the symbiote boosting her reaction speeds. She's quick. She's really really quick. Um, One of my favorite scenes in the entire book is when the Marines are like, "Oh, little girl should go play with her dolls." Okay, and she picks the biggest, toughest guy in the entire company that they're building and says, "Step out here on the mat with me," and basically turns him into a pretzel in like 15 seconds flat. Um, but she's she is about as far away from home as it is possible for a human being to be. Hell, it's not possible for them to be that far away from home except in fiction. And you find out as the novel goes along that she's even farther away from home than you thought she was, in terms of where she is and how this is all going to work out. And she is the only one of her kind that exists in this universe. And if her arrival on the planet means that, assuming we survive, we get like 80 years warning before the Kangas turn up. Plus, we get our hands on hopefully on the trolls' technology. So one may assume that when the Kangas do turn up, things are not going to happen at all the way they happened in, which means that she's probably the only one of her kind who will ever exist, because of the fact that the Kangas will not be dusting a planet with the symbiote. Um, so, I mean, she's really, and when Aston begins to realize just how alone she is, it has an enormous impact on his, I guess, respect for her is probably the best way to put it. Um, she and Aston, when they start putting together a strike force, certain folks in around the world have to be brought in on what's going on, but they have to be very cautious about it because the troll can read minds. But uh, the guy who is the executive officer of he's actually the commander of the company. Aston is the commander of the operation, but he's like Aston's second in command. Is this kind of tough as nails, black Marine major kind of thing? Who's He was up for command of his force recon battalion, and he gets pulled out sent to some wuss assignment, kind of thing. He's like, oh, okay, this is better. But anyway, he realizes that Aston and Ludmilla are the same under the skin because they've seen so much combat. Aston was a SEAL before he uh, got too old to run around with the teams. Um, Ludmilla is a fighter pilot who's been in the Navy and fighting trolls for literally 60 years, kind of thing. And he realizes that they're watching these tough young men getting into shape with exactly the same eyes. Okay. Um, I think that's one of the things that I really wanted to establish in this book, is that even though physically she's like 19, 20 by our standards, and he's in his 50s, the physical envelope doesn't mean very much compared to how much they have in common in terms of what drives them, what motivates them, what they've seen and done in their lives. Um, I hope that comes through.
Yeah, and they're both people that are, when trouble comes upon them, they do something about it.
Yep.
And she's just like, the embodiment of implacable. She's a troll killer.
Oh yeah, that's what she does.
Yes, that's what it's her job, and it is. And if it wasn't her job, she'd probably do it for free.
Yeah,
And
after her,
it takes her a while to back off from even to because Aston helps her well, what do you think the troll strategy is? And she just figures trolls kill people, I must kill troll.
yeah.
And then she backs off a little bit, and maybe it's a little more subtle, and it wants, and they do figure out what it might be.
Well, what she's really concerned about is that the troll may immediately act to carry out the Kanga's plans, even though the Kangas themselves have a minor accident called Ludmilla that prevents them from doing it. But she's afraid that the troll will. And it's Aston who says to her, okay, look, if that's what he was going to do, why haven't we seen him anywhere yet? What's really maddening for her is Aston is single-handing across the Atlantic on a sailboat when he picks her up. And the the Ludmilla and the trolls are throwing around multi-megaton nuclear warheads in atmosphere because these are warheads that are designed to kill super dreadnoughts in space. Okay, kind of thing. So these are like some really, really, really big explosions, which are fortunately really, really, really high up. But they're also the EMP from them is wreaking havoc on like passenger planes flying across the Atlantic and also on Aston's radios, which means that they are single-handing across the Atlantic, and she has no idea what is happening in the rest of the world where this troll is now loose while she is sailing slowly across the Atlantic Ocean. Um, I was mean to do
Rating.
that.
Yeah.
I really was. I admit it, but you know, and it's very very fortunate that she winds up with Aston because Aston knows a lot of people in the service and in the intelligence community and so forth. And so he is able to he's able to sort of at least convince some of his superiors that he's not totally insane about this good looking this tough as nails Marine colonel here, you know, laid Ludmila Leonovna. Oh, a Russian, huh? No, she's not. Well, actually, you know, kind of thing.
It's
Um,
not even from Earth. Well,
yeah.
it's I the like your reader was talking. There is a lot of present day resonance in the book, which is interesting to me. This the way that the troll manipulates the um, some of the national issues that are going on, even in that day.
Well, I think that's probably because when I was working on the troll strategy, he had to find issues that he could drive that already existed. He couldn't just, you know, he had basically he had to approach the task of how do you destroy a society by recognizing its internal flaws that already exist, because flaws exist in the healthiest of societies. It's the human beings are flawed, therefore there will be flaws. But he had to figure out which ones he could manipulate most readily. And the ones that he could manipulate most readily are the ones that generate the most resentment. And so he was, he basically, if you look at it right now, today, on both sides of our political schism, the real anger is driven by resentment and fear. Okay. I'm not saying, you know, this side is more responsible than that side. What I'm saying is that the polarization that we have right now is fueled on both sides by resentment and fear of the other side. Um, and that's the way that societies generally come unglued. Okay. Um, so that's the way that the troll drove humanity, at least in the United States, in order to facilitate putting his tools in control of the country and using that as his platform against the rest of the rest of the planet. So if there is a resonance with where we are today, it's because the currents that have produced our current um, resentment and anger and hatred, um, without a troll's intervention, are the same ones that he reached for when I wrote the book 30 years ago and made worse on his own. So what you're looking at is a confluence between 30 years of I hesitate to use we use the word progress, but of movement um, in the U.S. society that you and I are living in. as opposed to a year or so in the Trolls universe with somebody consciously, deliberately driving those issues with the advantage of advanced technology and at least limited telepathy and the ability to influence human minds. So we got largely to the same place, but in the Trolls universe, it was kind of like brought up with growth accelerants in a greenhouse as opposed to developing in the wild. Okay. So it was not a case of my saying, well, this is where we'll be in 2021. It was a case of my saying, where will we be in a dysfunctional society? It turned out to be welcome to 2021. You know?
Yeah.
But and it's not a particular it's certainly not me trying to take sides in where we are today. I mean, I have my views, and I think most people who know me know what they are. And any writer's views infuse his writing. Okay, but I really and truly do not deliberately write in a polemical sense. That's not how I approach it. I approach it, I'm going to tell a good story. Now, what makes a good story for an author is something that's going to be compatible with how he sees the world. Either it's going to be good, it worked out the way I saw it, or bad, it's blowing up and somebody has to fix it. Okay, I mean, you can't help that. It's very difficult. It's not impossible, but it's difficult to write a sympathetic villain whose mindset is completely different from your own. It's hard to have the character ring true, sort of thing. But one of the things that I've noticed on Facebook, I tend for some reason to have dumpster fires on Facebook, and I think one of the reasons for it is that my books appeal to a wide spectrum of political views, left and right. And so what's happening is they are looking at a Facebook post because I put it up and they read my books. And that brings them into mortal combat with one another, which I wish they wouldn't do, but it's it's the way that it is. Um, I find myself generally, not always, but generally being the voice of moderation, because one of the things that the troll is wiping out here is the notion of any kind of nuanced discussion across political or racial divides. And I have told people many times, I can't remember the last time I learned something significant talking about a subject with somebody who already agreed with me on it. And I think that the fact that we are no longer able to hold conversations, even with those with whom we politically differ, is a huge part of the problem that we have. It is far easier to demonize people on the other side of a divide when you're not talking to them, when anything that you are hearing from them is being filtered through social media or the partisan news broadcasts, left or right, or whatever, rather than in a direct face-to-face exchange with them where you can say, well, wait a minute, what about? And they say, well, I didn't mean that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's that loss of context and nuance that makes it possible for people to simply demonize everybody on the other side of a political debate. And I find that dismaying. I find it to some extent morally well, to a very large extent, I find it morally repugnant, and I try to avoid it. I don't always succeed because, as I said earlier about humans being flawed. The troll, however, is creating a situation in which nobody's thinking about that. And
Well, he's
so,
driving to the extremes he can.
yeah. And fortunately for the United States, he has a limited range that he can do this over. So he's really working on only one region while he is doing his dastardly stuff. Um, but
Well, clearly you have a deep and abiding authorial disdain and hatred for Biltmore House and Gardens, though.
no, I do not neither. I do not neither.
That's that comes
Listen,
across in your prose, I'll tell you that.
hey, you know, it's actually no, they're upset that somebody firebombed Biltmore.
Yeah,
Yeah, not as upset as Sharon was, but
yes.
you know, of course, Sharon is like, I had given Sharon the manuscript of Mutineer's Moon. This was shortly after I'd met her when she was still working in the bookstore. And I walked into the bookstore and I was talking to somebody else, and this stripped book comes flying across the store and hits me in the back of the head. And I turn around and it's Sharon. And I'm like, what was that for? She's, you killed Sean. I'm like, well, you know, excuse me, he's a character in a book. You killed Sean. You know, she still gives me grief over that, you know. And I told her, I said, you know, I named an entire continent-sized nature preserve on the capital planet of the empire for him. You killed Sean. And I'm like, okay, fine, you know, be that way. So yeah, there's the occasional authorial decision that she's like not real keen on.
Oh, that's the roughest criticism when they throw a book at you. But
oh yeah. Well, at least it was a paperback. I mean, you know,
yeah, that's right.
it wasn't a copy of like Jane's Fighting Ships. I, you know, wouldn't my writing career would have been cut short.
Well, she chose her weapon for
she chose it.
Effect she wished to have.
Yeah.
Out now at booksellers everywhere is The Apocalypse Troll by David Weber. It's an old new book. It's a really fun read. It's as fresh today as it was the day it came out, if you ask me. Anyway, I liked it. And I hadn't read it before, and I was like, heck, might as well.
I did.
Weber.
I did have somebody tell me, one of the reviewers say, this reads like very early Weber. And I was like, well, gosh, I wonder why. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us about the Apocalypse.
Thanks for having me.
Here is another entry in David Weber's Honor Harrington series masterpiece, Uncompromising Honor. Honor keeps her promise. The Solarian League. For hundreds of years they have borne the banner of human civilization, but the bureaucratic mandarins who rule today's League are corrupt and looking for scapegoats. They've decided the upstart Star Kingdom of Manticore must be annihilated. Uncompromising courage. Honor Harrington has worn the Star Kingdom's uniform for half a century. Very few know war the way Honor Harrington does. So far, hers has been a voice of caution. But now the Mandarins have committed atrocities such as the galaxy has not known in 1,000 years. They have finally killed too many of the people Honor Harrington loves. Uncompromising vengeance. Now Honor Harrington is coming for the Solarian League, and hell is riding in her wake. And now, David Weber's Uncompromising Honor.
HMS Imperator. In hyperspace. Will there be anything else, ma'am? Honor looked up from her plate at the quiet question. James McGinnis stood at her shoulder, holding the carafe of cocoa, his gray eyes dark. No, Mac. She shook her head. No, that's fine. I think we're both done. Are you sure? He tried so hard to keep the anxiety out of his voice, but she tasted it anyway. Yes, she said as gently as she could. I'm sure, thank you. She reached out to lay one hand gently on his forearm. That's from Nimitz, too. Yes, ma'am. It came out husky, and he set the cocoa on the dining cabin table, then ducked his head. Just buzz if you change your mind. I will. She tried to smile at him. She failed. I promise. He looked at her a moment longer, then nodded once and disappeared, and Honor looked back at the largely untouched food on her plate. The steak had been perfect, with the cool red center she loved. The salad, the baked potato, the stein of Old Tillman, all the components of one of her favorite meals. And she'd eaten less than half of it. She gazed at it for a few more seconds, then sighed and pushed back her chair. She stood, gathering Nimitz into her arms, and crossed the deck. She stood in the hatch between the dining cabin and her day cabin and looked at the portrait on the bulkhead above her desk. Her mother had taken that picture in the Whitehaven family chapel. Honor stood between Hamish and Emily, holding Emily's hand, her eyes glowing as Hamish faced Reverend Sullivan and recited his wedding vows. Nimitz rode her shoulder, and Samantha perched on Hamish's. And she tasted Nimitz's pain as he too looked at the people they would never see again. Despite his thick coat, she thought she could feel his ribs, but that was probably imagination. Both of them were losing weight, but it had been less than 3 days since that last hideous afternoon at Whitehaven. She knew why McGinnis was worried, just as she knew he too was grieving. She wished there was some way, any way, she could ease her steward's, her friend's pain, but there wasn't. She didn't have it in her. She had nothing in her, except a vast singing emptiness where the people she loved should have been. Nothing except the single, unwavering purpose left to her. The deadly determination, colder than the vacuum outside her flagship's hull, more focused and far more lethal than any warhead or broadside grazer. She had no idea what would happen to her and to Nimitz when that purpose, that determination had been discharged. She didn't care. It was all she and Nimitz had, all the universe had left them. She didn't know what the opposition would be, had less current information on her objective's defenses than she'd had before any other operation in the last 10 years. But she knew 2 things. She knew the Sollies couldn't possibly expect her this soon, and she knew she would accomplish her purpose, her mission, even if hell itself stood in her way. What happened after that could take care of itself. She stood another long, still moment, looking at that image of murdered love cradling her beloved dead. Then she set Nimitz gently on the perch beside her desk, sat in her own chair, keyed her terminal, and punched up Grand Fleet's order of battle.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Uncompromising Honor by David Weber. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a train hopper load of pristine Beanie Babies and Troll dolls, plus a dozen Robert A. Heinlein bobbleheads, and thanks and praise for David Weber, author of The Apocalypse Troll. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.